welcome to Pause for Payments. I'm Kristy Duncan, and I'm truly delighted to have a discussion today with two amazing leaders in the payments space. Cyrielle Chiron is Head of Research at Payments Canada, and Vanessa Chapman is General Counsel at the New Payments Platform in Australia. Welcome, Cyri and Vanessa.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Kristy. It's always lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Today we're going to discuss real-time payments, which are taking a different roadmap depending on which jurisdiction you're in. I've been really looking forward to this discussion because both Cyri and Vanessa are experts in real-time payments, and I know I can learn a lot from both of you. So let's get started. Every country, it seems, is at a different stage in the journey to real-time payments. Can you tell us about real-time payments in your market and how you see them evolving? Would you like to start, Vanessa?
Sure. Thanks, Kristy. So the New Payments Platform, which is the network infrastructure for real-time payments in Australia, was born out of a regulatory process originally in 2013 and was largely co-designed by the industry over a fairly long period, about 4 years, before it was launched and went live in February 2018. The network itself is quite unique in many respects. It's architecturally very different to real-time networks in other markets. And there were some fairly strong rationales for designing it differently, both in relation to resilience and in relation to sort of building out capability or a network that could be used for multiple services and purposes. Given that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a network like this, the versatility that you can build in at the inception stage was to us an incredibly important feature of the network. And we went live in 2018 with, of the 13 directly connected participants, sort of largely 10 were live one way or another, whether it was for receiving payments or sending payments or both. And over the last 2.25 years, we've seen incredible growth year on year in terms of account reach, in terms of the numbers of participants directly connected and indirectly connected, and the number of payments moving through the platform. So we're currently looking at about 1.3, 1.4 million transactions per day on average. We're seeing values that are incredibly high. The highest single payment exchanged through the platform was in the billions. So it's extraordinary in terms of that sort of use case. And because we introduced a feature called PayID, which is a proxy addressing service for payments, interbank payments, we envisaged that there would be a number of customers who would see value in registering either their mobile number or their email address or some other identifier as their PayID for receiving payments. And currently we have about 4.5 million PayIDs registered in that addressing service. So we're really pleased with the progress. It's fair to say that we always expected the rollout and the ramp up of this network to be slow, or not slow, but to take time. And 2 years really in the scheme of things, given the payments net system and the time it takes for networks to be established, we're really quite pleased with that performance. And we're seeing incredible use cases, incredible initiatives being built around it. And as we expected, services being built around the functionality that are real value adds. And I won't get into them now, but there are some really great use cases, particularly around government payments and emergency payments, that during these unprecedented times really are offer value, social and economic value to Australian individuals, consumers, businesses, and to the agencies that serve the Australian community.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to see these new platforms being used for COVID-19 use cases that we might not have envisioned when we were building them way back when. Thanks for sharing. Cyri, do you want to give us your perspective on the...
Yeah, sure. So we're not as you know, ready as Australia, and I'm glad to hear that it's actually working very well, because it's giving us, you know, a look in the future for us. So in Canada, the new real-time payment system, so we are building it now, and we refer to it as real-time rail, and we call it RTR. So if you see a lot of RTR, this is what we call it in our country. And it's expected to launch in 2022. So we have some time and some learnings to still have. So what is RTR? So it's kind of the same, a bit like what we have in Australia. It is a secure utility payment system that will be operated by Payments Canada and regulated by the Bank of Canada. The new system will provide a couple of things. So 24/7 payments that are final and irrevocable, and fiat account number-based routing and ISO 20022 messaging to support data-rich payments. It's kind of the same that that Vanessa was explaining. So we're trying to try to drive innovations as well and have different services that can overlay in our infrastructure. The last thing I want to mention is that underpinning the new system will be a flexible and robust policy and legal framework that reflects current market practices and deliver also the appropriate balance between, you know, the flexibility and the compliance that is always hard, and facilitates innovations because we will be able to have these new players being able to come and play in our system.
Oh, all great points. Thanks, Siri. So, Vanessa, you talked about use cases, and you know, going back to where we are in some jurisdictions, we're not as far down the road to real-time payments as Australia. But so some people might say, well, our system's not broken. Why are we spending all this time and money to fix it? Can you talk to us a little bit about use cases?
When people say their systems aren't broken, I think they're sort of possibly thinking about the fact that the systems they have, legacy systems, have quite a lot of infrastructure and structure are built around them. And in fact, changing some of that does require some effort. And so realizing the benefits of whether it's faster payment, whether it's a payment with more data, such as is able to be sent using the ISO 20022 message format, or whether it's some other feature that can be built in to the message, that takes some effort, and that takes some real thought and thinking about. For individuals, for consumers, what we've noticed is that the real-time feature or the real-time nature of payments gives people a sense of control. Individuals want to be able to move their money in the same way that they move their data, and you know, in a hyper-connected modern economy, if I can send an email to you, Kristy, in real time, why should I not be able to also send you the money I owe you for lunch, right? And equally with businesses, we observe that the world, the economy globally and domestically is changing. There is an increasing need for, you know, businesses and treasuries within businesses to be able to unlock the value in their liquidity, to be able to manage liquidity, to be able to manage their receivables and payables in a much more efficient way. And that involves obviously being able to harness the power of data and the power of speed to optimize processes that, sure, they're not broken today, but they could be so much better. And when we talk about harnessing the power of data, that also includes the very many intermediaries in the payments chain who have regulatory obligations to monitor payments, to monitor transactions, to report transactions to regulators in the financial crime space. And the ISO 20022 message format facilitates the carriage of the data that enables that to be done in an efficient way. So sure, today's systems aren't broken, but they can be so much better. And if you talk to the people who work in the, you know, back offices of big businesses that have, you know, extraordinary overheads that are built around managing receivables and payables. And if you talk to the teams at AUSTRAC who lament the lack of insight and data to enable them to identify where the risks are, then you see that in fact it's not, sure, the system's not broken, the legacy systems aren't broken, but we can do so much better, and we've got the tools, and so we should.
So exciting, the opportunities that it opens up. Thanks for that, Vanessa. Siri, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, I like the fact of saying that it's not broken, and I want to add on this. I always say, as you say, it's not because something is currently working that we cannot improve it and innovate, right? There is always room for improvement. And I like the fact that you said that we have the tools, so why can't use it? I want also to weigh in on other benefits. We see the same things, right? That it's about, you know, having something faster and more convenient and more secure. So why don't you want it? But also bringing choice, because we're bringing innovation. You know, the fact that we kind of opening it for new players to come in, that will bring choice for Canadians to have other ways to pay for good services and also transfer money. So that's also something that will be very important, I believe. And there's really kind of two things that come to my mind. The theme of fast, as you said, like, I don't know, imagine you are selling, I don't know, a second-hand car, and you don't want the person to leave with your car until you have the money, you know, in your pocket or in your account. So that is a good example where it's a good use case, at least, you know, for in Canada. And building back on the example you mentioned, Vanessa, about COVID-19, the situation we are in definitely, you know, accelerate the need to have something like this, at least in Canada. So I don't know if you know, but we had these massive initiatives in Canada where we and the whole ecosystem, you know, work together and encourage people and businesses to enroll for direct deposit to receive, you know, the payments from the government instead of getting checks. And that was a key, you know, a key benefit to receive things faster and in a more secure way. So imagine if you would have RTR in place, how things would have made way much easier. We see exactly the same, you know, what you mentioned with businesses, and especially the smaller businesses, with the value of ISO 20022 and data-rich payments. So I don't want, you know, to repeat exactly what you said, but imagine that if you have only a few payments to reconcile, you may be thinking, okay, maybe I don't necessarily see the value, but if you have hundreds, that can really, you know, drive you mad at some point. So we conduct some research about, because I have to mention research, you know, Kristy, among, you know, like some SMEs. And I know this is global, and in Canada as well, like the top two key pain points when they think about payment is cash flow management and reconciliation. So there's two key things that a real-time system, which is enabling data-rich payment, can help. And when we did this study in 2018, so it might be a little bit old, but I'm pretty sure it's still valid today, we estimated the cost of SME would save by moving away from checks to electronic payments, and reducing, you know, the manual processes and having a better, you know, being better at forecasting cash flow, to be around $6 to $7 billion. So that's not really, you know, that's not insignificant. There is just another thing I want to mention is security, right? Security as a key benefit. It's not like the payment system is not secure today, but we are working toward building a system that will be even more secure, that we're working to have a new framework. And I can tell you that the policy and the legal team, you know, is working days and nights to develop, you know, this flexible and robust framework that will make, you know, the Canada's payment system even more resilient. So it's not something that, you know, it's not broken, but I will bring these other benefits. And the last thing I'd like to mention, because I think this is something that is important, is the fact that it will strengthen, you know, Canada's competitive position, and that would be true for other countries as well. By building, system that would definitely boost the economy, but also, we need to keep up, like Australia is already doing it. And I think you have at least, I don't know, I think something around 50 or 60 other countries that have real-time payment. So if we're just not doing it, like everybody else is going to do it. So you want to stay competitive in that space and be able to provide what is going towards the innovation, making sure it's still secure. And then I can talk about hours about, what consumer and businesses want, but they want things that is mentioning, like sending an email, like they want things faster. They want things that is going with, the world evolving around them. So why can't I do this today? And it's more frustrating for a consumer that go back and say, I don't understand why I can't do this. It should be easier. It's not easy to implement, but it should be for them feeling that it's easy. So that would be kind of what we see. And I think it's valid globally, actually.
Yeah, well, clearly Australia is already starting to reap the benefits there. Thanks, Sue. So I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about domestic and what's happening in each of our respective markets. But we need also, I think, to look at the global payments market. And we've got, so many different systems around the world, payment systems that are, some of them are interconnected and some we're using one global system that may or may not be offering on a real-time basis. But how close do you think we are to achieving true interoperability for real-time payments in a cross-border environment? Maybe you want to kick us off there, Cyrielle?
Sure. Well, I think the key word here is standardization. So if you want to unlock interoperability, and this is a hard word for me to say, but if you want to unlock this interoperability, you need standardization, right? You need to have the same thing everywhere. If everybody just do things on their corner, it's going to be hard after to have things talking to each other. So ISO 20022 that we talk about will definitely help harmonize, all those key benefits. And we cannot, as I said, do things in the corner. So I know we talk a lot with Australia, for example, but we need to talk to all those other countries to make sure that we are aligned. And on top of my head, for us in Canada, thinking like P27, it's a good example, right? Like in the Nordics, like they succeed to do something together, to be able to send money in the Nordics. Like so they don't necessarily have the same currency, all of them. So it's actually, something that's to prove that you don't necessarily need to have the same currency. And for us in Canada, it would be, well, we need to align with the US, right? Because it's our biggest trading partner. So we need to understand what they do. And they do have, real-time payments already, with the clearinghouse. And the Fed is, I forgot when, but the Fed is looking at doing, another system, which is real-time. I think it's 2023 or 4 or something. So we are working on it at the same time. So if we are working on it at the same time, we should talk so that we should make sure that when we build, those business model and those platform legal frameworks and everything, we need to make sure that they are compatible at the time of building, not after that. So that would just be key things that I have in my mind for cross-border. And I'm sure talking with Australia.
Yeah, thanks, Siri. Vanessa, did you want to weigh on interoperability in a cross-border environment?
Sure, and I think I agree with everything that you've just said there, Siri, about harmonisation to the extent that you can. And I know that many of our listeners will know about the work that's being done in terms of implementing ISO 20022 for international payments as well within the SWIFT model and the but in the meantime there is an opportunity for transposition and for mapping to be provided, and certainly in Australia we've already under the NPP rule framework pre-positioned for a use of the NPP by domestic correspondent banks to remit the value of international payments domestically, or by international money transfer businesses to use the NPP to do payouts or to remit domestic payments. That service actually isn't dependent on the originator being in a jurisdiction that's already a 20022 jurisdiction. So you can map from one message format to another, and largely that's a commercial decision by correspondent banks and by international money transfer businesses that would ultimately want to use this service. But that mapping is not impossible, and there are solution providers who could step into that space to provide that seamlessness and that harmonization that would otherwise require a standard message format. But certainly globally, I think there's a strong level of confluence across most geographies towards ISO 20022, which makes sense. The richness of that standard and the level of, just common sense data that can be carried with the payment really lends itself to that being the default standard in most jurisdictions. And certainly we've pre-positioned for a global, international, sort of global real-time system. And when it goes live, when ours is in production, I will imagine that would be sort of at about the same time that we might see that happening in other geographies. It's dependent on many things. It's dependent on, receiving banks, sending banks and receiving banks being very comfortable with the regulatory implications of using a real-time network for an international payment, and being really comfortable that there's enough technology capacity and differentiation and potentially message differentiation to enable those international messages to be appropriately treated within the NPP ecosystem.
So fascinating. Thank you both. This is really interesting to see how this is all evolving both domestically and globally. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about fraud, because as we move to faster payments and we can, in theory, execute them in seconds or fractions of a second, we still need to be able to manage the fraud. And what I'm understanding in the market in different geographies is that doing that fraud management can be a challenge. So do you want to talk a little bit, Vanessa, about how you manage the fraud in the real-time environment and what special things you need to do?
Absolutely. It's a key consideration. And as Siri said earlier, security and fraud and just ensuring that speed doesn't necessarily undermine security and fraud management is incredibly important in any payment system. And it's a given that obviously adoption of any system is dependent on it being as safe as options or other alternatives. We were certainly very focused on fraud management and fraud capabilities and fraud detection and prevention capabilities as a key requirement for all participating institutions, without necessarily providing a central fraud detection capability, but requiring participants to think about how they use their existing capabilities to maximum effect and in an appropriate way for a real-time system. Before we went live, I think there were a number of commentators and others who predicted very significant fraud spikes based on the experience of banks in the United Kingdom in 2008 when Faster Payments was launched. And we observed at the time that the Australian banks by 2018 had almost 10 years of digital banking under their belts, and Australians are generally very high adopters of mobile banking, internet banking, but mobile banking in particular, high rates of smartphone ownership in this market, and very high levels of mobile banking. So, and authentication models and fraud controls around device management, biometrics, etc., very well evolved. So taking all of that into account, we were somewhat cautiously optimistic that we would see no increase in fraud as a result of real-time payments. And we we do collect data that to validate our hypotheses, although they're not publicly available, they're not published. And so I'm unable to actually tell you exactly what the fraud loss rate is for a real-time payment, but it's on balance about the same as it was before real-time payments were introduced.
Well done. So
yeah, well done.
I don't take all the credit for that. Some, obviously, but not all. It's on banks. The fraud teams within the banks are some of the most, like me, as a lawyer, I worry about everything and do think endlessly about what could go wrong, and so pre-plan for it. Fraud teams are much the same. And we work reasonably closely with a group of fraud experts from across the participants to monitor trends, to consider data, to look at sort of emerging risks, to think about standards around, pay ID registration, for example, and to think about security controls as an industry, as well as, obviously building on the work that they're doing themselves. It's a very collaborative space. I find that fraud experts are very comfortable to talk with their counterparts in their other organisations, to talk about what they're seeing, what kind of they're seeing not work, what they're seeing works, to talk about the increasing sensitivity to cyber risks and how that might be managed. And it's not competitive space. This is in a network. Security and fraud is an ecosystem risk, and it can be that a vulnerability in one point within the ecosystem results in loss somewhere else. So it's in the entire ecosystem's interests to have a really robust and a very focused, collaborative approach to sharing information about best practices and about risks and managing them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vanessa. I really agree that fraud should not be viewed as a competitive issue in any payment system, but certainly not in a real-time payment system. So we're actually getting closer to the end of our time here. So I'm going to ask one more question to each of you and ask you for a very brief response. So tell us, like, for countries that are just embarking on their real-time payments journey, what advice would you have for them? I'm going to start with you, Cyrielle.
Start. That would be, I would say. No, I would say leverage what happens, globally in other countries, but exactly what you mentioned, Vanessa. Collaboration within the ecosystem is very important. Make sure you have those sessions where you work and learn from each other, and making sure that everybody is embracing the same journey, because we don't know what will be the next Uber of payments, so but we need to be ready for it, and I think that's pretty important. So there are different ways, and you have to say really concise. So there are different ways. You don't have to do exactly as the other countries. You don't have to create your own rail if you cannot, or if you don't want to. You can leverage systems and solutions that are already there. But I would be, consider it, because that's beneficial. You have different use cases from different countries that shows that it is going to boost the economy and it is going toward that direction. So that's what I would say.
Start now and learn from others.
Yeah.
So we'll learn from the Australians and the Brits. Vanessa, I'll give you the last word here. What advice would you offer to countries just starting?
Well, presumably if they're starting, they've made a decision, they've made a policy decision about actually going forward. And I think the most important thing to focus on is governance, having really robust governance and thinking about how decisions are made and why decisions are made, and doing that with the whole industry and all stakeholders who are affected, because banks do not, and financial services organisations don't operate in a bubble. And the second thing is, for those who are within that community of affected stakeholders who are participating in the building, to focus on business value creation, not just business cases. Business value creation is a very is a much broader concept, and I think it takes into account at the end of the day, it takes into account the interests of consumers and customers who, increasingly should be at the centre and are at the centre of everything we do. And those customers and those end users, their needs are now. They have needs today that are being met in a potentially substandard or suboptimal way by existing systems, and increasingly to meet their needs, the services that we offer and the financial services sector needs to evolve to deliver on those.
Well, this has been a great discussion. We've brought out some really great points. I love the governance one coming from a lawyer. That makes a lot of sense. But the business value creation is important, the standardization, the data, the speed, the convenience, the choice, so many things that we all need to consider, and bringing the whole payments ecosystem together, all the different stakeholders, makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing your great insights, Vanessa and Cyrielle. It's been great. And I'm going to encourage all of our audience to join us online for our many other Pause for Payments webinars that we've got hosting with other inspirational speakers like Vanessa and Cyrielle from around the world. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.